Part 1. The opening. There is a letter that Albert Einstein once wrote to the family of a dear friend who had recently passed away. In that letter, he did not offer the usual words of comfort. He did not say that the departed had gone to a better place, nor did he suggest that time would heal the wound. Instead, Einstein wrote something that would haunt philosophers, physicists, and seekers of truth for generations to come. He said that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. He was not being poetic. He was not speaking in metaphor. He meant it literally. And if time itself is an illusion, then something far more unsettling follows from that claim. If past and future do not truly exist, if the present moment is nothing more than a trick of perception, then what does that say about the one who perceives it? What does that say about the self? This is not a question that belongs only to the domain of philosophy. It is not the kind of abstract riddle that people debate over coffee and then forget by the afternoon. This question sits at the very heart of modern physics, neuroscience, and the ancient spiritual traditions that have been whispering the same answer for thousands of years. The self, the thing each person calls I, the entity that seems to sit behind the eyes and watch the world unfold, may not be what it appears to be. It may not be a thing at all. And Albert Einstein, the man who reshaped humanity's understanding of space, time, and gravity, may have been one of the first modern scientists to see this truth clearly. To understand what Einstein truly believed about the nature of reality, one must first understand the revolution he ignited. Before Einstein, the universe was a stage. Space was the floor, time was the clock on the wall, and matter was the actor performing upon that stage. Everything had its place. Everything was separate. The observer stood apart from the observed. The self was the audience, watching the show of existence from a comfortable seat in the theater of consciousness. But Einstein destroyed that theater. He tore down the walls and revealed something far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more terrifying than anything the classical world had imagined. Part 2. The Revolution of Space-Time. In 1905, a young patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, published a paper that would change everything. The special theory of relativity revealed that time is not absolute. It does not tick at the same rate for everyone. A person moving at high speed experiences time differently from a person standing still. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer may occur at different times for another. This was not a theoretical abstraction. It has been measured, confirmed, and verified with extraordinary precision. Time is relative. It bends, it stretches, it is woven into the very fabric of the universe in ways that the human mind was never designed to comprehend intuitively. 10 years later, Einstein went even further. The general theory of relativity showed that gravity is not a force in the traditional sense. It is the curvature of space-time itself. Massive objects like stars and planets do not pull things toward them through some invisible rope. They bend the fabric of reality, and everything else simply follows the curves. The Earth does not orbit the Sun because the Sun is pulling it. The Earth orbits because the Sun has warped space-time into a shape that makes the orbit the most natural path. The implications are staggering. If space and time are not fixed, if they are dynamic and responsive, if they bend and stretch depending on the distribution of matter and energy, then the very stage upon which existence unfolds is not stable. The stage and the actors are one. And here is where the question of the self begins to emerge. If everything in the universe is interconnected through the fabric of space-time, if the boundary between here and there is blurred by relativity, if the boundary between now and then is dissolved by the block universe interpretation of physics, then where does the self begin and where does it end? The feeling of being a separate entity, a distinct individual moving through time from past to future, depends entirely on the assumption that time flows. But Einstein showed that time does not flow. In the framework of physics, all moments exist simultaneously. The past is not gone, the future is not yet to come. They are all there, laid out like pages in a book that has already been written. The person reading the book experiences the pages one at a time, but the book itself exists as a complete whole. Part 3. The Optical Delusion of Consciousness. Einstein once wrote something even more directly relevant to this question. In a letter that has become one of his most quoted passages, he described the human experience of separateness as a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. He said that a human being is a part of the whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. A person experiences thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, but this is a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion, Einstein suggested, is a kind of prison, restricting each person to their personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to them. The task, he said, must be to free oneself from this prison by widening the circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. These are not the words of a cold, detached scientist. These are the words of a man who had glimpsed something profound about the nature of reality and was struggling to communicate it. Einstein was not a mystic in the traditional sense. He did not meditate in caves or follow the teachings of any particular guru, but his physics led him to conclusions that echo the deepest insights of Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and the mystical traditions of every major civilization. The self is not separate from the universe. The feeling of separation is an illusion, and this illusion is the root of much of humanity's suffering. Consider what it means to live inside this optical delusion. Every moment of anxiety is rooted in the belief that there is a separate self that must be protected. Every moment of jealousy arises from the belief that what belongs to another is separate from what belongs to oneself. Every fear of death is the terror of a self that believes it will cease to exist. But if the self is not what it appears to be, if it is not a fixed, permanent, independent entity, but rather a process, a pattern, a temporary configuration of the same energy and matter that makes up everything else in the universe, then the entire foundation of human suffering begins to crack. Not because the pain is not real, but because the one who seems to suffer may not be as solid or as permanent as it appears. Part 4. The neuroscience of no self. Modern neuroscience has begun to arrive at the same conclusion from a completely different direction. When researchers scan the human brain, they do not find a central command center where the self resides. There is no single region, no homunculus sitting behind the control panel, making decisions and directing the body. Instead, what they find is a vast network of interconnected processes, each one performing its own function, each one operating largely without conscious awareness. The sense of being a unified self is something the brain constructs after the fact. It is a narrative, a story the brain tells itself in order to make sense of the chaos of sensory input and competing neural signals. Studies of patients with split brains, where the connection between the two hemispheres has been severed, reveal something deeply unsettling. Each hemisphere can operate independently, with its own preferences, its own reactions, and its own apparent sense of self. When the left hemisphere is asked to explain an action initiated by the right hemisphere, it does not say that it does not know. Instead, it confabulates. It invents a reason, a story, and it believes that story completely. This is not a disorder. This is what the brain does all the time. The sense of a unified, continuous self is a confabulation, a beautifully constructed illusion that serves a biological purpose but does not reflect the underlying reality. The neuroscientist David Eagleman has described consciousness as the smallest bit of what the brain does. The vast majority of neural processing happens beneath the surface of awareness. Decisions are made before the conscious mind knows about them. Preferences are formed before the reasoning mind can justify them. The self that each person takes to be the captain of the ship is actually a passenger who has been given a convincing map and told that they are in charge. Einstein, working from physics, and neuroscience, working from biology, have converged on the same unsettling truth. The self is not what it seems. Part 5. Quantum reality and the observer problem. There is yet another layer to this story, and it comes from the branch of physics that Einstein himself helped to create but never fully accepted. Quantum mechanics revealed that at the subatomic level, particles do not have definite properties until they are observed. An electron does not have a specific position or a specific momentum until a measurement forces it to choose. Before measurement, it exists in a superposition of all possible states. This is not a limitation of human knowledge. It is a fundamental feature of reality itself. The act of observation does not simply reveal what is already there. It participates in creating what is there. Einstein was deeply troubled by this aspect of quantum mechanics. He famously argued that the moon does not cease to exist when nobody is looking at it. He spent decades trying to prove that quantum mechanics was incomplete, that there must be hidden variables determining outcomes in advance. But experiment after experiment has confirmed the quantum picture. Reality at its most fundamental level is not fixed, not predetermined, not independent of observation. And this raises the most profound question of all. If the observer participates in shaping reality, and if the observer itself is an illusion constructed by the brain, then what is actually doing the observing? What is the ground of experience? What is left when the illusion of the self is stripped away? Some physicists have suggested that consciousness itself may be fundamental to the universe, not something that emerged late in the evolutionary process, but something that was there from the very beginning. This idea, sometimes called panpsychism, suggests that every particle of matter has some minimal form of experience, and that what humans call consciousness is simply a complex arrangement of this fundamental property. If this is true, then the distinction between the observer and the observed dissolves completely. There is no self looking at the universe. The universe is looking at itself, and it is doing so through every pair of eyes, every configuration of matter, every moment of experience that has ever occurred. Part 6. Einstein's cosmic religious feeling. Einstein spoke often about what he called the cosmic religious feeling. He described it as the most profound motivation for scientific research. It was not the religion of churches and temples, not the religion of commandments and rituals. It was the feeling of awe and wonder that arises when a person contemplates the structure of the universe and realizes that it is comprehensible, that it follows elegant mathematical laws, that it is beautiful beyond anything the human mind could have invented. Einstein said that the most beautiful experience a person can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. This cosmic religious feeling is not compatible with a self that is truly separate from the universe cannot feel awe at the universe, because awe requires a dissolution of boundaries. Every scientist who has experienced the thrill of discovery, every artist who has lost themselves in the act of creation, every person who has stood beneath a night sky and felt the vertigo of infinity has experienced this dissolution. In those moments, the optical delusion of consciousness weakens, the prison walls become transparent, and something vast and luminous shines through. Einstein understood that this feeling was not irrational. It was the very thing that made science possible. The desire to understand the universe arises from a deep intuition that the universe and the self are not separate, that understanding the cosmos is in some fundamental sense understanding oneself. Part 7. What remains when the self dissolves? If the self is truly an illusion, then what remains when the illusion is seen through? This is the question that terrifies most people, because the natural assumption is that if the self is not real, then nothing is real, and existence becomes meaningless. But this is precisely the opposite of what happens. Every contemplative tradition that has explored this territory reports the same thing. When the illusion of the separate self weakens, what remains is not emptiness, but fullness. Not despair, but profound peace. Not nihilism, but a love so vast that the personal mind cannot contain it. Einstein hinted at this when he spoke of widening the circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This is not a moral instruction imposed from outside. It is the natural consequence of seeing through the illusion. When a person realizes that the boundary between self and other is not fixed, not solid, not real in the way it appears, then compassion arises spontaneously. It is the default state revealed when the effort of maintaining the illusion of separation is released. The great Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said that we are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. The Hindu sage Ramana Maharshi taught that the question, "Who am I?" is the most direct path to liberation. Because when one investigates the nature of the self honestly and thoroughly, one discovers that there is no separate self to be found. What remains is awareness itself, pure consciousness without a center, without a boundary, without a name. This is not a belief or a philosophy. It is an experience reported by thousands of individuals across every culture and every century of human history. And it is an experience that modern physics, perhaps inadvertently, has begun to point toward as well. Part 8. The question that changes everything. Albert Einstein did not set out to prove that the self is an illusion. He set out to understand the nature of light, the behavior of atoms, the geometry of space-time. But the deeper he went into the fabric of reality, the more clearly he saw that the common-sense picture of the world, the picture in which solid objects exist in empty space and separate selves move through linear time, is fundamentally mistaken. The universe is not a collection of separate things. It is a single, undivided, dynamic process, and every apparent boundary within it, including the boundary between self and world, is a construction of the mind. This does not mean that the self is useless or that it should be discarded. The self is a tool, a remarkably effective biological instrument that allows a human being to navigate the world, form relationships, and create meaning. But a tool is not an identity. A map is not the territory, and the self is not the totality of what a person is. To mistake the self for the whole of one's being is like mistaking the dashboard of a car for the entire vehicle. The dashboard provides essential information, but it is not the engine, the wheels, or the journey. The question is not whether the self is real or unreal. The question is whether a person is willing to look beyond the self, to investigate the nature of their own experience with the same rigor and honesty that Einstein brought to the investigation of the physical universe. Because the reward for this investigation is not an intellectual conclusion. It is a transformation of experience itself. It is the discovery that the prison of separateness has no walls, that the boundaries of the self are drawn in water, that the universe is not something one observes from the outside, but something one is, from the inside, in every moment. Einstein understood that the most important questions are not the ones that can be answered with equations. They are the ones that change the way a person sees. They are the ones that dissolve the optical delusion and reveal the wholeness that was always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized. The question of whether the self is an illusion is one of those questions. And once it is asked sincerely, nothing is ever quite the same again.